Our next and last speaker is a dear friend of mine. We met 4 or 5 years ago, right next door, actually, at a grant writing workshop. And I immediately saw that little spark. I knew I had to know her. It wasn't just the flaming red hair and the tattoos. There was that recognition of somebody who likes adventure. I could see she was somebody who is evolving and constantly in a state of becoming. And sure enough, I was right. And we started going for coffees and talking about business. We're both creative entrepreneurs, and we're accountability partners now. And my medium is photography. Hers is mixed media and murals. She's vibrant, she's earthy, she is Pamela Sue Johnson.
My kids warned me, payback tonight, Mom. When I was growing up, I knew that I wanted to be I never figured it out. I'm going to tell you right now, when I was a kid and people would do that thing, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would draw a blank. I had no daydreams, I had no fantasies, I had no clue. And even when I got to high school, I still had no sense of direction, clueless what to do with my life after high school. It's why I chose not to go to college, because why go? I had no idea what was ahead. I felt no sense of call. And so after high school, I just started working the random jobs that you get when you're young. Typically entry-level, low-wage jobs. And that was pretty much how it went for me year after year after year. Just bouncing around different jobs. And then I got married, and I had a couple of kids. And somewhere in my 40s, I began to mess around with art. I would sit at my kitchen table, pull out the art supplies, and just start making a god-awful mess. And I loved it. It felt good. So it became a hobby of mine. And when my kids were in high school, the man I was married to, he said, hey, the factory is hiring. Maybe you should apply. And it was a good paying job. It was a good union job. And very competitive. It was the kind of job you only needed a high school diploma. I got that. But so many people would apply. It was fierce. But I went after it, and I remember the day that I got the phone call on my landline. I was in the kitchen, and when I got that good news that I had been hired, and I hung up that phone, and then I started doing that happy dancing you do when you get good news like that, because it felt like life-changing news is what it felt like. It meant that I would be doubling my income. That's good news for me. That's good news for my family. And what I couldn't define for you then was there was a great deal of my self-worth tied up in my earning power. There was a great deal of my self-worth that had been affected by this lack of a career path that just never quite emerged for me. So getting this job and becoming a professional Oreo maker for Nabisco, you're welcome, Vancouver, Washington. And right here, I took one for the team. Let me tell you right now, that was a ginormous bag of cocoa powder, and we had a little dispute, and I did not win that round. Man, I took that shower. It was like chocolate coming out in the bathtub. So I started working at this job at this factory, making all this money. And pretty soon, the job became very pressing. It was, first of all, a very physical job, and here I am, a middle-aged woman, and I'm doing very physical work with heavy industrial equipment, lifting heavy things, and of course, a lot of repetitive tasks in a factory. Not to mention there were 13-hour shifts were common, 7-day work weeks were very, very common. And so it was a very taxing job on my body, but it also became crushing to just my life because of those conditions. It was a kind of a lifestyle job. You know, you lived to work kind of job. The money was so good, though. How dare I complain? I was making bank. On a Sunday afternoon, I out-earned an ER nurse with my double-time pay. That's how good that money was. Oh, yeah. Good union job. And then when my kids got to high school, the man I was married to, our marriage came to a peaceful end, not because of the job, just we had an expiration date, apparently, and we amicably went our ways. He's here tonight. High respect for my ex. And I found myself suddenly in this season of life as a woman in her 50s who's entirely self-determining. I'm living on my own. The kids are grown. You know, they're living their own paths. And I'm just doing my deal, working in this factory. But I can feel that crushing weight on my body. It's taking a wear and tear on my body. It's wearing down my heart and my soul. The art that I had enjoyed making over those years, that hobby that just started to get bigger and bigger, like more than a hobby kind of thing was happening, wasn't doing that so much because I was exhausted all the time. And I had a friend at that time who was a therapist, and she had a focus on career guidance. And I said to her, is it true that 50% of Americans don't like their jobs? And she said, oh, Pam, 50% of Americans don't like their lives. Whew. And I felt that. I felt that because I was acutely aware that as a woman coming into her 50s, that the number of my days that lie ahead of me are now shorter than the days that are behind me. And is this my life? How then do I want to live? And as I worked in that factory, shift after shift, day after day, I became acutely aware, I became so deeply aware that I was living my life in a constant state, a perpetual state of dissatisfaction, constantly. And I began to think about that. And here's what I knew. Let me start here, that I don't want to live in that state. I don't know what to do in my life, but let me start right there. I do not want to live the rest of my days in chronic dissatisfaction. So while I was in this factory, I was there all the time, I just began to reflect. And I began to think about, what are my options here? You know, I make peace with the job, option one. I make great bank. The job is crushing my body, but it's not crushing my bank account. I make money. I make real money. I got paid every Friday, and Friday was a good day, all that money coming in. But I live in perpetual dissatisfaction. So I began to lean into that, and I thought, well, if I didn't work here, what would I do? And I decided to take this opportunity in my life to indulge my creative imagination and to let it run wild and free. That's my art. To let my imagination run wild and free without any barriers or any protest. If I could live my life any way that I wanted, without regard to my age and stage of my life, without regard that I am a woman making her bills on her own, without regard that I don't have college credentials or a particularly strong resume, if I could live my life any way that I want, how would I live it? And what was interesting was as I allowed my creative imagination to be wild and free and just go to all the impossible places, this thing began to happen. And that I unknowingly was decluttering the rubble that had accumulated on my heart over these years. And suddenly the essence of who I am, that creative, expressive woman, the dreams and desires that were unrealized, unspoken, unthought of, were now allowed to see the light of day. And I began to think on that. And I realized that if I could live my life any way that I wanted, I would choose to live my life centered on creativity and community. And if not now, then when? And so on April Fool's Day, because I love symbology, on April Fool's Day, 2019, I submitted my resignation to that factory, and I posted on my social media that I would be a fool if I did not go after that which pulses inside of me, because it felt like a call, and it was the most reckless decision of my life, so far. I, yeah, my life is not over yet. My life is not over yet. And as I left the factory, it was like turning on a faucet of creative inspiration. I began to make more art than I have ever made in my life. Every day, every day, every day, I began to make so much art. And let me tell you, I was not a proven artist or a proven art seller or proven anything. I just made a leap of faith based on what pulsed inside of me. And I began to learn how to network. I began to learn how to sell art. And then I decided to take my hand at teaching. And I don't have a college degree, but I went and I pursued opportunities, and I discovered I got a little knack for teaching art and helping people discover their creative self-expression. So I began to make art, began to sell art, began to engage with customers and patrons. This one right here, See Me and My Beautiful Scars. This artwork was bought by a friend of mine who had just come through breast cancer. And today, the art print of this work is one of my best sellers. And when people buy it, often they want to tell me their story. And I had no idea how meaningful it would become that I'm more than an artist. And I remember the man who bought this art print because his wife's breast cancer had just come back. And he cried, and I hugged him. I'm selling art, and this is what happens. I remember the young woman who came into my art booth. You know, I work in the markets, the art markets, and she bought this print and didn't say a word. And then she just pushed up her sleeve, and I could see the scars on her arm from self-harm. And I said to her, some scars are not seen, are they? And so these were meaningful transactions that began to happen one after another as I continued to make art, sell art, teach, and engage with people. And this remarkable thing began to happen, in that I began to realize that this passion to be an artist was very me-centric. There was such a drive in me to achieve, to not fail, to show the people I used to work with. You know, at that factory, it's a 92% retention rate, and you become the subject of workplace gossip when you decide to leave that job. They're never going to find a job. Where are they going to make this money again? And I knew that. I knew I would become the subject of workplace gossip. And I could have quietly left. I could have. But instead, I decided, watch me. Watch me. And my coworkers surprised me because they rose up to root and cheer for me. We're rooting for you, Pam. One coworker came up to me and she said, crying, and said, I've been here 30 years and I just could never leave. She'd been chronically dissatisfied decade after decade. And she was cheering me on. You go, Pam, you go. And so it was very driven that I must achieve being an artist for myself. I need to earn a livelihood. I need to make this work. But also these people, the factory, people watching me, this growing audience that was telling me how much the choices, the leap of faith that I made was inspiring them. And then as I began to engage with students and patrons and have all these meaningful encounters, like the mother and daughter from Utah that were visiting, and they bought this artwork, Your Dreams Inspire My Dreams. And it spoke to them. It spoke to the 12-year-old. So her mom bought it for her. And it's in her room because that 12-year-old knows what she wants to be when she grows up. She wants to be an artist. And she bought my art to keep that inspiration flowing. Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild? So this shift that I couldn't anticipate began to occur as I was driven, I was achieving success. I built up my street cred in the fine city of Vancouver, Washington, that Pamela Sue Johnson is in town, and she's making art and selling art and doing the deal. And it's so cool, it's happening. But the shift began to happen because I began to experience that the people I was encountering through art and art workshops and creative retreats that I facilitated, that they were telling me how inspired they were and empowered in their own creative voice, in their own authenticity, in their own discovery of their desires. And I began to realize that this passion of mine to live a creative-centered life had shifted into purpose to inspire and empower others. A couple of weeks ago, I got a message from someone. I've just met her a couple of times, and she reached out from her hospital bed where she's having this sudden, intense health crisis. And she wanted to let me know that my art inspires her, but she follows me on my socials. And she said she also wanted to let me know how my life inspires her. Do you think that felt a little better than that paycheck I used to get on Fridays? That's pretty wild. In a couple of weeks from now, I have the honor that I will be installing interior murals for a 911 call center in a nearby county that fields over 1,000 calls today from people who are in distress. And I get to be the artist to do that for those fine people. Isn't that wild? That is what was crushed out of me from being in that factory job. If the factory job had been cushy and the money and all of it was cushy, I'd still be there. But I needed a crushing. When we make wine, how do we make the wine? We crush the fruit to release the essence of that wine. And I needed that crushing to release the essence of the wine of who I am. This is what my crushed life looks like today. This photo was taken last summer after the end of a creative retreat, the end of a day where 15 women trusted me with their time to lead them in creative experiences in a beautiful forest setting. And at the end of that day, which was an amazing day, one of the women came up to me and she did that thing. She put her hands on my shoulders and, to get my focused attention. And then she simply said, "Today, you changed my life." That's what my crushed life looks like. And I want to say to you that I know that there are people going through a crushing in your life, whatever version that might be, that there's some tension, something's pressing on you, there's friction, there's something that feels like it's causing you to die. And I want to say to you, instead of focusing on what feels like you're dying, find the wine. What's being pressed out of you? What is the life that is being pressed out of you in whatever crushing your life is going through right now? Because this is what my crushing looks like. This is my life. And I want to say, what do I want to be? Now that I'm all grown up, what do I want to be? Who do I want to be? And I am here to tell you that I am Pamela Sue Johnson. And it is my creative passion to live my life with purpose, to inspire and empower as many people as I can for the rest of my days. Thank you.